This video is about saddle stitch binding. It explains the special features of this type of binding and how to do it. Saddle stitch binding is a form of all-along bookbinding sewing. You can find out more about all-along bookbinding sewing in this video. For book blocks with very thin layers, the stitching thread can cause a steep incline at the spine of the book block. In saddle stitch binding, the stitching threads are drawn alternately between two layers. This means that two layers are tacked together at the same time, which minimizes the incline at the spine caused by the stitching thread. Saddle stitch binding works on both flat and raised bands. The sewing frame is prepared accordingly. You can find out more about setting up the sewing frame in this video. Depending on the thickness of the book and the number of layers, the first few layers are stitched using simple all-along sewing. This ensures a little more robustness within the book block. Here the saddle stitch binding begins from the third layer. The third and fourth layers are positioned together. Clamps can be applied to the layers to make it easier to switch between layers while sewing. The needle is guided into the first layer from the outside and then guided back out through the next pinhole. The band is wrapped around and then guided to the fourth layer. At the next band, the thread comes out of the fourth layer, loops around the band, and goes through the pinhole in the third layer. Both layers should always be checked when pulling the thread tight. To link both layers, a kettle stitch is used between the first and the second layer. The next two layers are positioned and also secured with the clamps. The layer is changed again for each band. The next two layers are sewed alternately. This means that two layers are always sewed at the same time up to the last ones. The last layers are sewed using simple all-along sewing again. At the end, the thread is knotted and trimmed during the kettle stitch. The bands are removed from the sewing frame and also trimmed. The thread runs at a slight slant as a result of the change. Inside the layer, the thread jumps back and forth between the pinholes. The sewing is less robust in the middle of the book block because the layers there are not secured firmly to the bands in all places. In saddle stitch binding, two layers are sewed together at the same time. The thread jumps back and forth between the layers. While this prevents a pronounced incline at the spine, the sewing is not particularly robust.